Offices can get, quote, spooky at times. You never know what is lurking in those large halls and meeting rooms. The video which you just witnessed was uploaded by a TikTok user, jakbar78. You can see some crazy stuff unraveling in an office. The following is an animated depiction of the same. The time was 9 p.m. when I clocked in for work. My first port of call was the storeroom behind the guard post. That was where we changed from our day clothes into the white and blue uniforms that designated us as security guards. Backspace Corporation was strict about its dress code for the security staff. All the lower-level staff, from the foreman to the factory workers under them, the support staff and security staff, were required to wear uniforms. I didn't like it much, but the pay was so good that I didn't mind. I got this job just as I got out of the Army. That meant that I came with heavy recommendations and immediately got the senior-most position. I may have gotten sick of all the violence, but I had been one of its most feared champions before I applied for a discharge. That was why the company was so happy to have me, and the same reason I was put in charge of security here. I had a sense that most of the other security men didn't like it. They were here before I came in, so they felt one of them deserved to get the spot, but that wasn't my problem. All they could do was gripe. Quickly, I got rid of my jacket and the t-shirt under it and rolled down my pants. As always, my uniform was in its place, laundered and ironed with razor-sharp creases. As I dressed in it, I imagined what would become its fate if we had to handle a situation here. It'd probably end up crumpled, torn, and stained with blood, just not my blood. That thought brought a smirk to my face. A moment later, the smirk froze in its place and turned to a smile. These bastards were all in already. The uniforms were gone from all of their clothes hangers, and in its place, their day clothes. This was the first time this was happening, just when I was beginning to consider doing something about it. I tucked in my shirt and picked up my cap. Time to earn that ridiculous pay. From the storeroom, I walked into the main security office. I shared it with my deputy Collins, who I'd put in charge of the day shift. He was next in line for the position of chief security officer, and should have taken over after the old chief left. As evidenced by the spick and span nature of the office, Collins was a neat man. I sat in the swivel chair, which overlooked a wide, long monitor. It was partitioned into 3 different screens. Each of these screens had live video footage of different parts of the office, with multiple camera options available. The security guards were posted in the blind spots not covered by the cameras that fed the monitors. I picked up my walkie-talkie to check their status. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, something on one of the screens drew my attention. It was Cam 3, Screen 2. It showed the main office. It was a big room with an array of desks, chairs, and computer systems. Something weird was going on. A chair was moving on its own in the room. There was nobody behind it pushing it. As a matter of fact, the room was empty. There was no employee at that hour. It slid over the floor steadily, like whoever was pulling it, whatever was pulling it, was taking its sweet time. I blinked and rose to my feet for a closer look. Something was moving now. On screen 1, cam 4, one of the metallic drawers opened on its own and heaps of paper flew out. All these were super important files. And then, all hell broke loose. On screen 3, cam 1, the false ceiling below the metallic drawer room popped open, and all the files and sheets tore through it. This isn't happening, I told myself, and shook my head vigorously. I was definitely hallucinating. That was the only explanation. Perhaps a vein had burst open in my brain and was now flooding it with blood. I rubbed my temple hard and closed my eyes, mentally searching for any sign of a headache. There was none. Not even the faintest throbbing. I opened my eyes and looked back at the screen. I knew that no one would believe what I just saw, and the whole incident would surely tarnish my image. It needed to be taken care of within this night itself. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and pressed the PTT. "Post 5, come in," I said. "My name is Jared, sir," Post 5 said. Although it had been close to 2 weeks since I joined, I still couldn't seem to remember the names of the men working under me, so I referred to them by their positions in the facility. It annoyed them, but I didn't care. "Check the main office right now," I said. Do you see anything?" Jared asked. I opened my mouth to talk again, but then decided against speaking. Whatever I had to say would not make any sense to Jared. He'd think I was going insane. No, it was better for him to see it for himself. "Check the office," I said again. "Yes." The acquiescence was thrown at me carelessly. I could swear there was a hint of disrespect to it. That didn't matter to me. What mattered was that the order was obeyed. The attitude would be dealt with later. I watched on screen, waiting for the door to the office to open. It did a moment later, and Jared walked in. He stood in the doorway staring wide-eyed at the room and shaking his head. Then he knelt down and put his hands together as though in supplication. I drew closer to the screen. His mouth was moving and his eyes seemed to be wide. Who was he talking to? There was no one in the room. I pushed the PTT again. "Post 5, Jared, what are you doing?" "Please, Dominus, spare my life." Jared's voice was choked with terror. "Please." On the screen, he was now clutching on his throat. He fell sideways and hit the floor, twitching. "Everyone, converge at the main office now," I yelled into the walkie-talkie. Without confirmation that my order had been received, I dashed into the storeroom and grabbed my firearm from my locker. My heart was pounding wildly against my ribcage as I raced out of the guardhouse. The office was big and housed well-guarded secrets. There were tech IPs and whatnot. Whoever this person was, I had to take them out. The lobby was empty as expected, and to the right, the office door was open. Jared lay just inside, unmoving. I slowed to a walk as I approached him. Where are the others? There were supposed to be 6 other security guards here this night, but there was no sign of them here. I went into the room staying low and with my finger on the trigger, ready to shoot. Just as I had feared, there was nobody in the room. I bent over Jared and shook him. "Jared! Jared?" But he did not respond. Jared was dead. Suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind and I fainted. I woke up the next morning with a large crowd around me. Apparently, I had passed out on the floor that night alongside the lifeless body of Jared. The CEO of the corporation was not pleased at all. In spite of me being a veteran, he humiliated me in front of the whole office. My part of the story wasn't believed at all. Only I knew that I didn't pass out, but there was someone there. My job was terminated there and then. 3 months had passed since the incident, and no company bothered to even look into my impeccable resume. Someone at the Backspace Corporation had leaked that night's mess in the industry, and I had become a laughingstock. The next day I received a letter. I rushed to the door hoping it would be a positive reply from one of the companies I had applied to. Strangely, the envelope had no mention of the sender. As I opened the envelope to read the contents of the letter, I couldn't control my anger. "Hope you are doing well, my friend. Chief Security Officer, Collins."
Did you enjoy the first story? If you did, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. Oh, if you want your broccoli to be served fresh, then don't forget to hit the bell icon. Keep munching.
Oh, that yellow app. Everyone, at least those I knew, loved Snapchat. Everyone around me used it. At first, I was not a fan of it, but with time, I found myself deeper in love with it. I had just gotten home from a walk that day when my mom called to tell me that she was going to be back home late. They had something to do at work. "It's okay. Just don't be too late," I told her. I had refused to go to college. I was taking my own time after high school. I needed to find a job, help my mom, or anything of that sort. I relaxed on my bed after the call to chat with a few people. It was only random talks and viewing their stories on Snapchat. I replied to some of the stories, but there was a particular one that caught my attention. I viewed a story where a girl, the owner of the account, looked dead with blood all over her body. I had not paid attention to it and ignored it. Something clicked in my head, and I went back to check it. The story was no longer there. I could not remember the person that posted it. I just randomly viewed it, and now, someone could be in trouble that I couldn't help with. I tried to go over the stories again, in case I was missing something, but there was nothing. Nothing at all. I tried to relax my mind through the questions that kept coming. What if the girl was dead, and whoever killed her mistakenly posted it on Snapchat while trying to delete something on her phone? The killer, or whoever, might have realized it quickly and deleted it. Though, there was also the question of it being a joke. Could someone joke about something like that? It was better to find out. I sat up on my bed and retraced everything I had done after my mom called me. All the names, stories, bits of information that I was missing that could help. Eventually, I was able to recall the names of those I had viewed the stories of. As the names popped in my head, I went back to check if their story was still there. If it wasn't, I chatted them up with a particular question that I knew only they could answer. That way, I could be sure they were the ones actually replying to my message. Laura. I remembered the girl. I checked her story and it was no longer there. It was just a few minutes ago that she deleted the story, or whoever deleted it. I chatted her up and waited for a while, but she didn't respond. My mind had begun to think of different scenarios of what could possibly be going on with her. Many things could be wrong, and no one would know because she was probably alone. She was my mate in high school, someone like me who had refused to go to college too. I kept sending messages which she kept ignoring. No reply. I called her repeatedly, but she didn't respond. I was going to have to check on her at her house to make sure she was fine. Luckily, her house was not too far from mine. It was only about a 5-minute walk, though I got there faster since I basically ran from my house. The front door of her place was open, and no one was home. I knew her parents would be working, but she had a brother that was supposed to be back from school. He was still in high school, but the house was empty and quiet. I checked again on Snapchat and noticed she had just posted one of her old pictures on her story. She was never the type to do throwbacks. Something was definitely wrong. I called the police immediately. I was not sure of my theory, but it was enough to get me scared. I was never the kind to think the worst of things, but I already thought the worst of things possible with Laura, and I just had to make sure she was fine. The police came around in a short time, and I explained everything to them, which they took note of. You said she posted on her Snapchat after you thought she was not fine. I don't think there's the need to go over these things unnecessarily. She is fine. Why'd you call the police? An officer asked. I know, but like I said, she's not the type to post throwbacks, and not with a love emoji. That's not Laura. Something's wrong. Whoever has Laura and her phone did it so no one would notice that something is wrong, I told them. The officers looked at me strangely, whispered something to themselves, and looked back at me like they were trying to understand something about me. I waited patiently and earnestly. They were not supposed to take that long except when they found something. I paced around the front of Laura's house with hope that she was going to be around or something would be found. I turned around and saw the officers bringing out a body covered in blood. The person was not breathing or moving or trying to get up. It can't be Laura, I thought. The tears had started to drop with the worst thoughts in my mind. We found her like this, the officers said. Thank you for contacting us as soon as you noticed this. We didn't find her phone in there, which means that whoever did this has her phone and is using it so no one would know something is wrong. How are they going to get the killer? Laura could not just be dead like that. I wanted to ask the officers how they were going to find the killer, but words wouldn't come out of my mouth. Only tears from my eyes. Laura was gentle, and I couldn't help but wonder who would even think of killing such a good-hearted person. The police packed her body and moved her out of the house after contacting her parents and those that they needed to contact. They claimed they were going to take her to the hospital to get an autopsy. I walked back home with many questions still on my mind. My mom had been calling me because she was home already, and I was nowhere to be found. I sent her a message saying I was fine so she would not be worried. Walking back home was the only way I could get my mind off with music playing loudly in my ears. I was going to wait patiently for the report to come back, and whenever they found the killer, I only hoped it was soon. I could not imagine how her parents were feeling at the moment. Days turned to weeks as I waited for any update on Laura's killer. Sadly, the only update I got was of her family moving to another town. The pain of living in the same house where their daughter was murdered was too much for them to bear. As for me, I suffer from constant anxiety. I was the one who messaged her after the incident. I don't think I would ever feel safe again